Christmas Eve is supposed to be the most guarded night of the year, a time of warmth, closed doors, and the safety of family. But in 1945, for one family in West Virginia, the night of miracles turned into a night of impossible shadows. While the world celebrated the first Christmas after the Great War, George and Jennie Sodder watched their home burn to the ground in less than an hour. It was a tragedy, but the real horror began when the fire died out. Fire usually leaves something behind: metal, stone, and most importantly, bone, most. But in the basement of the Sodder home there was nothing. No remains, no traces of the 5 children who were supposed to be sleeping upstairs. Did they burn into thin air, defying the laws of physics? Or did they vanish into the night before the first flame was ever lit? Welcome to the Unknown Archive. Today we sift through the cold ashes of a Fayetteville mystery to find 5 missing siblings in a conspiracy that lasted a lifetime. George Sodder was an Italian immigrant who had built a successful trucking business in Fayetteville, West Virginia. He was a tough, outspoken man with strong opinions that didn't always sit well with the local community. George was a vocal critic of Mussolini and the fascist regime in his homeland. In a town with a significant Italian population, this created tension. It created enemies. Months before the fire, a stranger appeared at the house asking for work. He pointed to the back of the house where the fuse boxes were located and said, "This is going to cause a fire someday." George found it odd. He had just had the house rewired and the electric company had declared it safe. Then another man, a life insurance salesman, became enraged when George refused to buy a policy. The salesman shouted, "Your goddamn house is going up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed. You are going to be paid for the dirty remarks you have been making about Mussolini." George dismissed it as empty threats. He was a man of action, not a man of fear. But Christmas Eve 1945 would prove that the threats were very real. The night began peacefully. 9 of the 10 Sodder children were home. The oldest son was away in the army. After a small celebration, the parents went to bed, leaving the younger children to stay up a bit later with their new toys. At 12:30 a.m. the telephone rang. Jennie Sodder woke up and answered it. A woman's voice she didn't recognize asked for a name she didn't know. In the background, Jennie heard laughter and the clinking of glasses. "Wrong number," Jennie said and hung up. As she walked back to bed, she noticed the lights in the house were still on and the curtains were not drawn. Usually the children took care of this before going to sleep. She saw her daughter Marion asleep on the couch. She assumed the other 5 children, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, were upstairs in their bedroom. She went back to sleep. At 1 a.m., Jenny was woken again by a sharp thud on the roof, followed by a rolling sound. She listened for a moment, heard nothing more, and drifted back to sleep. At 1:30 a.m., she woke up a 3rd time. This time it wasn't a sound. It was the smell of smoke. She jumped out of bed and opened the door to the hallway. Smoke was pouring from the office area where the telephone line and the fuse box were located. The stairs to the children's bedroom were already catching fire. Jenny screamed for George. They managed to get out of the house with Marion, 2-year-old Sylvia, and the 2 older sons who were sleeping downstairs. But 5 children were still upstairs. The staircase was now a wall of flame. George ran back outside, screaming their names toward the upstairs windows. There was no answer. This is where the tragedy turns into a series of impossible obstacles. George tried to call the fire department, but the phone was dead. He ran to get his ladder, which he always kept leaned against the side of the house. It was gone. It had been moved and was later found hidden in a ditch nearby. He decided to drive his 2 coal trucks to the side of the house and climb on top of them to reach the windows. But both trucks, which had worked perfectly the day before, refused to start. He tried to use water from the rain barrels, but they were frozen solid. George stood in the snow, watching his home dissolve into a furnace, unable to reach 5 of his children. The fire department was only 2 miles away, but due to it being Christmas and a shortage of staff, they didn't arrive until 8 a.m. By then the house was a smoking pile of debris. The family waited for the cooling ashes to reveal the bodies. They expected the most horrific sight of their lives. But as the firemen began to dig, they found something even more disturbing. Nothing. They found the kitchen appliances. They found fragments of the roof, but they found no human remains, no skulls, No charred bones, not even the smell of burning flesh. The fire chief, F.J. Morris, told the family that the fire had been hot enough to completely cremate the bodies. In the unknown archive, we challenge this conclusion. A house fire, even an intense one, rarely reaches the temperatures required to cremate a human body in less than an hour. Cremation requires temperatures of 1,400 to 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit for over 2 hours. The Sodder house burned down in 45 minutes. Bone fragments should have been everywhere. The official cause of the fire was listed as faulty wiring. But George knew his phone line had been cut, not burned. A repairman later confirmed that the wires had been sliced with a tool. This wasn't an accident, it was an abduction hidden by an arson. As the weeks passed, sightings began to pour in. A woman at a roadside hotel claimed she saw the 5 children in a car with Italian-looking adults the morning after the fire. Another witness at a restaurant said she served breakfast to the 5 children who were accompanied by 2 men and 2 women in a car with Florida license plates. The Sodders became convinced their children were still alive. They believed the fire was a diversion to kidnap them, likely as retaliation for George's political views or an attempt to extort him. George and Jennie refused to let the case die. They erected a massive billboard on Route 19, featuring the photos of the 5 missing children and offering a massive reward. For 20 years, that billboard stood as a silent accusation against the town of Fayetteville. In 1949, the family hired a private investigator and decided to conduct their own excavation of the site. They found a few vertebrae bones. They sent them to a pathologist at the Smithsonian Institution. The report was shocking. The bones had never been exposed to fire. Furthermore, they belonged to an individual much older than any of the missing children. It appeared that someone had planted the bones in the dirt to convince the family to stop looking, to provide a death where there was none. Who would have the power to plant evidence and influence the local investigation? The salesman who threatened George was a member of the coroner's jury that ruled the fire an accident. The connections to the local Fayetteville elite and the Italian Mafia began to emerge. Was George Sodder being squeezed by a protection racket he refused to join? Then came 1968. 23 years after the fire, Jennie Sodder received a letter in the mail. It was postmarked from Central City, Kentucky, but it had no return address. Inside was a photograph of a young man in his mid-20s. He had dark hair, dark eyes, and a facial structure that bore a striking resemblance to Louis Sodder, who was 9 at the time of the fire. On the back of the photo, a cryptic message was scrawled: Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, Elil boys, A90132 or 35. The family was electrified. They hired another investigator to go to Central City, but the man took their money and vanished. They never found the person in the photo. George Sodder died later that year, never knowing the fate of his children. Jennie followed him in 1989, having worn black every day since the fire, as a sign of mourning. The youngest daughter, Sylvia, continued the search until her death in 2021. She was the last person who was there that night, the last one who remembered the smell of the smoke. Let's look at the theories in the unknown archive. Theory 1. The children died in the fire. Skeptics argue that the basement was so hot it disintegrated the small bones of children. But what about the thud Jennie heard on the roof? Years later, Sylvia found a hard, rubbery object in the yard. It was a pineapple bomb, a type of incendiary device used in combat. This explains the rolling sound on the roof. The fire didn't start in the basement, it was thrown onto the house. Theory 2. The Mafia kidnapping. George was a successful businessman who didn't play by the rules of the local system. Taking his children and sending them back to Italy would be a classic, brutal message. The woman who saw them in the car mentioned Italian-speaking adults. Did they grow up in Italy, never knowing their true family? Theory 3. The life insurance. Revenge. The salesman's threat was too specific to be a coincidence. If he was involved in the kidnapping, he had the perfect cover within the local legal system. Why didn't the children scream? Why didn't they come to the window? Some suggest they were drugged or taken from their beds before the fire was set. But Jennie saw the lights on and the curtains open. This suggests the children might have been lured outside by someone they knew, or someone who claimed to have a gift for them. It was Christmas Eve, after all. A stranger with a toy could easily lead 5 excited children out the door and into a waiting car. The disappearance of the Sodder children is a masterclass in frustration. Every lead ended in a wall. Every piece of evidence was either stolen, hidden, or ignored by the authorities. The fire chief later admitted he had found a heart in the ashes, but he buried it in a box and didn't tell the family. When it was dug up, it turned out to be a piece of raw beef liver that had never been in a fire. Why would a fire chief fake evidence of a death? To give the family closure so they would stop asking questions? Or was he protecting the people who actually set the fire? The level of corruption in the Fayetteville Police Department at the time remains a dark stain on the case. Today, the site of the Sodder home is an empty lot. The billboard is gone. The parents are buried. But the question remains, where are Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty? If they were kidnapped, they would be in their 80s or 90s today. They might have children and grandchildren of their own, entirely unaware that they were the center of the most famous disappearance in West Virginia history. Or perhaps they know? Perhaps the man who sent the photo in 1968 was Louis, trying to reach out, but too afraid of the people who took him to say more. The Alil boys and the numbers on the back of the photo have never been decoded. They remain a final cryptic signal from the void. The Sodder mystery is a reminder that evil doesn't always hide in the shadows. Sometimes it stands in the light of a burning house, watching a father cry for his children. It is a story of a family that refused to accept a convenient lie. They chose a lifetime of searching over a moment of false peace. We look at the photos of those 5 children, frozen in 1945, and we see the faces of a world that was stolen from them. The fire was the end of their home, but it was only the beginning of their mystery. Every Christmas Eve, the story resurfaces. A ghost story for the modern age, where the ghosts are still alive, somewhere, under different names. The Unknown Archive keeps this file open. We honor the memory of George and Jennie by continuing to ask the questions they were told to forget. As you sit in your home tonight, look at your family. Value the safety of your walls. Because in 1945, 5 children learned that the world can change in the time it takes for a fuse to blow. No bones, no bodies, only a photograph of a man who looks like a ghost. Thank you for joining us in the Unknown Archive. If you have any theories on the Sodder children or the Louis photo, share them below. Stay curious, stay safe, and keep watching for the truth.